The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. So Dawn Fluharty here, coming to you from my home office. Everyone kept kind of asking me why I did all my webinars in 1 week. So we've been doing webinars all week, and it's because spring has sprung in California. I know they're still dealing with snow in the Midwest and things aren't popping yet in the East, but California, you know us, we usually start earlier than everyone else, and this year with our nice, warm, dry February, we really started earlier than everyone else. So we've seen a lot more pests come out earlier. We've seen trees pop sooner, disease show up faster. So the more information I can get out to you guys, the quicker, the better. I know we're all still out there doing applications, and I commend you for taking care of our urban canopy. But do be safe out there, and if you guys have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to ask. But yeah, any questions you have, pop them in, and we'll try and get them all answered at the end. So keep in mind, this is a California palms webinar, and the reason why I stress that is because our palms are different than what we tend to find throughout the rest of the country. And some of our treatments actually vary because of the location. So that being said, we kind of talk about how we came to have palms everywhere in Southern California. And then it creeps up to Northern California. And then funny, we try and have palms in Oregon and Washington as well. So palm trees have moved throughout the coast, the West Coast. And the irony behind all of this is, with these palms showing up everywhere, they are displacing our normal tree canopy. So instead of having a tree-lined street, we now have a palm-lined street. And palm trees do not provide the same benefit as trees when it comes to stormwater runoff, oxygen production, shade. Palms being monocots don't offer the same benefits. So how did this trend towards palm get started? And it actually really did start because they were a sign of wealth. If you were in a wealthy neighborhood, if you were a wealthy landowner, you planted palms as a sign of wealth. So you'll find some of our areas where we have our palm-lined streets. That's exactly it. And it's kind of perpetuated that over the years. But the problem is we've needed to get more and more different palms, larger, more stately, and unfortunately that means we have a much larger palm palette than we ever did before. We actually only have one native palm to California. That's it, one, the California fan palm. Every other palm that we have brought into California is not a native. So they struggle here. And if you notice all of the palms in these photos, what do we notice about where they're growing? It's not in turf. So that's the thing about our palms. They do not want to be growing in turf situations. They prefer to be in dry, sandy soil. And unfortunately, we have this tendency of planting them where they don't want to grow. So almost all of our palms are under some sort of stress, whether it's nutrients, disease, pest, and so they become a challenge to manage. So today we're going to kind of review some of the things we can do to help put our palms in the best condition as possible. But if one happens to die, feel free to plant a tree instead. I know, just one little plug. So why are we losing all of our palms? Well, I'm going to start with this one, because this is an excellent example of climbing spikes over and over and over again. The thing about palm trees is they don't heal themselves. They're not like a standard tree where if you wound it, cambium layer seals over the wound and seals it shut. A palm tree, once it's wounded, it's always wounded. It does not have that ability to heal itself. So every mark, bit of damage that occurs is there for the life of the palm. So we try and keep that in mind when we're dealing with our palms. Try not to spike them if you can help it. Try to keep any sort of damage off the main trunk, and that will help increase the life of your palm. The other biggest issue we have against our palms is the over pruning. We like to get up there and clean them so much to the point where we have just a couple fronds popping out the top. It looks clean, and I get it from the liability standpoint. We want to make sure we don't have to go up there as often to clean them. We don't want that debris to build up because we know rats and other critters can live in that frond debris. But the biggest issue is we have a tendency of over pruning when we do it. And there's a rule of thumb when it comes to pruning palms. Palms, the way they work is their nutrients come from the old fronds and go into the new fronds. So if you over prune a palm tree, you remove the palm's nutrients. So in this case, the palm tree on the right there, any palm frond that is at a 45 degree or less can be removed. By that time, they've usually used up the nutrients that are going to pass into the new fronds. So we don't want to prune past that. And then at that point, you can see the one on the left that's been finished up pruning. We pretty much only have like 7 or 8 fronds left on that. Barely enough to keep that palm healthy. So therefore, it's going to be stressed and be much more susceptible to pests and diseases. So the things we can do, try to stop spiking, really try to stop over pruning, and whatever you do, keep the irrigation off the trunk. Like I said, they do not like to be planted in turf situations, and they really don't like water being sprayed on the trunks. You can see the damage that's being done by the overspray of water on the trunks, and unfortunately, this can cause structural damage after time. And nobody wants to see an entire, 30-foot palm go over because of structural damage because of irrigation at the bottom. So keep that in mind. Drip irrigation is fine, but just at least move the spray heads away so that they don't spray on the actual trunk itself. And then in that center photo, you notice there's something kind of interesting going on. It looks like they have like a cage around the trunk. That was an attempt to keep rodents off of. There's actually kind of a curved apparatus at the top of it to keep rodents from climbing up the trunks. That was one thing we saw kind of early on, that rodent damage does actually do quite a bit of damage to palms. And so there's different techniques out there to try and keep the rodents from climbing up the palm trees. Keep in mind, whenever trying to protect the trunk of the palm, do it in a manner that does not cause damage to the palm itself. And I get a lot of questions on the photo to the left. Those things we kind of see breaking through the trunk there are air roots. People have asked me what causes air roots, how do I stop air roots, are air roots detrimental? No, technically they're not detrimental. This is a palm that is now starting to produce more roots. You can see there's water that's kind of triggering it, that's being sprayed on there. We see a lot of large canaries that get a lot of air roots and they kind of start to lift. Unfortunately, we can see damage actually done to planter beds and sidewalks because of sometimes these air roots mass actually go out and break them. But still, it's one of those things. It's not detrimental. However, I did observe one canary that had air roots about 5 feet up on one side. At that point, I would be maybe a little concerned about the stability of the palm. So keep that in mind. Try and keep water off the trunks of our palms if we can. So the way palm physiology pretty much works, it's not like our standard trees where we have our bark and our phloem, our cambium, our xylem, and our heartwood. This pretty makes up the fact that you have kind of like a pseudobark layer in the kind of a cortex layer, and then you get your vascular bundle. And those vascular bundles go straight up to the top of the palm, to the meristem of the palm. So whenever we're doing an application into a palm tree, we have to get the chemical into a vascular bundle. Do we have to get it into all of the vascular bundles? No. And it's because they're all going to the same location. So we're not trying to get this same kind of even distribution like we try and get on trees. So that being said, we really only need one injection site to deliver the chemical into the tree. However, we do have to make sure that that injection site makes it in to the vascular bundles. So why are we injecting palms? So usually it's because we're trying to keep all the chemical trapped inside the palm, not in the air, soil, or water. But there's something people don't realize when we inject palms, is that makes sure we get the full dose inside of palm trees. You'll see on some of the issues we talk about later that dose is kind of what's key in treatment, whether for nutrient or pests, getting it all trapped inside the palm. And then, of course, it's, something we can do in public locations. Well, the public is around, so no need to shut down streets or have to tarp if we're going to try and spray a palm, which I snicker, but we actually do that. There are application methodologies where we actually spray the canopy of a palm with a bucket truck. And that is one of those situations that is very difficult, and timing is very key, unfortunately, with that one. So The thing also about with palms is it's kind of the same thing as every other type of tree we're working on. It's only affecting the pest that's feeding on the palm. It's not affecting the beneficial pests in the area. So that way we can maintain our beneficial pests. And of course we get the longer residuals on the chemicals as well because they're trapped inside the tree. So let's move on to actually how we inject the palms. So remember how I said we're just going to do one injection site, and we're going to drill in through the pseudobark, and we're going to drill in until we kind of hit like a white fleshy tissue that is the xylem tissue. Like other types of trees, that tissue is a white color. So it's the same whether you're dealing with, you know, an oak tree or a Canary Island date palm. It's really that kind of same fleshy white, in this case, tissue. The only trick is the drilling depth is what makes things different. Because we have to get through the pseudobark. And usually you could be drilling in 3 inches, 4 inches, sometimes 6 inches, depending on the tree, the palm itself, as to how far you really need to drill in to hit that tissue. But then once you do hit that tissue, you go ahead and you set a plug. I always set it so it's just slightly recessed below the bark itself, and then, or the pseudobark, and then you inject through that. I have noticed sometimes if I'm putting in a rather large dose, I may have to set that plug a second time because all of a sudden I'll start getting moisture forming around the outside of the plug. If I tap that plug in a little deeper, I get a proper seal again, and I can continue the injection without any sort of leakage. Because dealing with pseudobark, it doesn't seal around the plug as well as what we see in regular trees. So just be prepared that when you tap it in initially, start your injection, you might get a little wanting to start to seep around the edge. Just tap that plug in a little bit further and continue the dose. There has been a couple times where I've been rejected on my injections. Once was because we did not hit the pseudobark. We went in probably about 8 inches, in pseudobark, and didn't actually hit a vascular bundle. And so we thought we'd just try it with water and see, you know, maybe we missed it, maybe we just mis-ID'd it. Nope, we really did not. We'd gone in 8 inches and had not hit the vascular bundle. So we had to pick another location. And it went in after just about 3 inches. So clearly there was some sort of a compartmentalization in that first location that we'd gone in on. And whenever we go in, we're always looking for a discrete location, because remember, a palm's not going to heal over that plug. So therefore, we want to pick the most inconspicuous location possible. And so we try and go as low as possible as we can. And we also tend to go on the direction not facing where people are going to be looking. You know, so you don't want to put on the sidewalk side or the side facing the door when walking out the building. Try and look at the most discrete location you can possibly put it. And then the other time I got rejected was one when the palm was way overwatered and it was not taking anything else in its vascular bundle. It was just filled with water. So at that point we waited a few more weeks until some of the watering from the rain had subsided and went back again, and the application went fine. So there's a few tips and tricks to injecting palms, and it's definitely kind of an art. So the first thing that I don't quite agree with this, but it's a good layout of how it's done, is this gentleman is definitely going higher than I would expect him to go on a palm. I would be definitely trying to go closer down to his shin level. But the whole idea is the same. And the thing about palms is we're almost always dealing with some sort of disease. So keep that in mind. So in this photo pattern here, you can see he drills in, and then right after he pulls that drill out, he disinfects the drill bit. And that's just so he knows he's done it, he hasn't forgotten about it, and before he goes to the next palm, it's already been disinfected, and there's no issue of possibly vectoring disease. And then he goes, he sets the plug in. You can see right there, bottom left, he's just put it in the hole. Bottom in the center, he's starting to tap it in, and then he goes and does the injection. So it's a very similar process to what we do with trees. It's just we tend to have to drill a little deeper in than we normally would, and then we tend to set that plug just so it's slightly recessed below the bark. We don't set it all the way back in the hole. And then we also have the ability sometimes to actually be able to reuse those sites. So that's kind of encouraging. The other way of injecting the palms is by doing it without the plug. And so in that top left photo, you can see they're drilling in with a very long drill bit. And on that top right photo, they're actually using what we call our stinger needle to go into that site. And so that needle just gets pushed into the palm until it seals around itself, and then you do your injection. So when you pull it out, there may be a tiny drip or two of chemical that wants to come out. Be sure to rinse it off so you don't accidentally stain the bark of the palm. But we tend to use that methodology when we're dealing with palm trees that have a lot of petiole debris on them. So odds are that drill bit, those first 6 inches might actually just be going through petiole debris and not even getting in through the pseudobark and into that vascular bundle. And then that very long needle works to get through all that petiole debris and pseudobark and into that cambium layer. So, but in this case, it's a very smooth bark palm, very easy to work with, so you could easily do the plug and inject method as shown in the bottom photos. So I know there's lots of questions about injecting palms. We still tend to say use the plug if you can, and it has a lot to do with the fact of that white rubber septum in the center of that plug. That is pretty much what is keeping that chemical inside the palm. When that needle goes in, it just stays inside the plug, so there's no risk of vectoring disease with the needle. When the needle comes back out, that rubber septum seals itself, so we don't run into that same dripping or leaking we'll see without using the plug. And with palms staining as easily as they do, I really recommend using the plug. We also know that when using the plug, we have the chance to reuse that site until it kind of dries out and doesn't longer takes up the product. But if we do it without the plug, we know we never get to really reuse that site. So that is one of those things we tend to always try and use the plug if we can. And then the whole trick is you gotta water. So it's very similar to trees in the fact that if you have a palm that is planted someplace where it's not getting irrigation, again, it's gonna need that water to really help move that chemical up that vascular bundle and into the meristem and the new fronds at the top. So don't water too much at the beginning, just a tiny bit, just to kind of get it going, starting to wanting to uptake. You want to do it just enough to trigger, but not to accidentally saturate the palm, which you can do pretty easily. So therefore, it's a very small amount at the beginning. Do your application and then go ahead and water it in after. So these are all the different plant healthcare solutions that we offer for insecticides. Notice how I don't have my beloved AceJet. If you guys know me at all, I always talk about AceJet. It's an acephate, and it's incredibly fast acting, but it's not labeled for use on palms in California. So sadly, it is not here, which is actually not too bad because the main chemical we tend to use on palms is imidacloprid. So we're either using the Imajet or the Imajet 10. And this is one of those imidacloprid products that we inject in, and we tend to always recommend using the regular Imajet unless we have a large dose we want to do and it's easier to get in half or twice the concentration, then you can bump up and use the Imajet 10 product. So let's talk about some of the pests and diseases that we see in palms, and I'm going to start with this guy first. I'm sure a lot of you guys have already heard about the South American palm weevil. But this one, pest-wise, is right now probably the most deadly pest we have for our palms. We haven't had too many pests that truly kill our palms. The one we did have, we managed to eradicate a number of years ago. But this guy is new, and he definitely has the ability to kill these palms. So the South American palm weevil came up out of the south. Right now, it's pretty much still just in Southern California, pretty much as far north as kind of Mission Beach area. The problem with this one in particular, this weevil feeds at the meristem, so it can pretty quickly kill a palm by just eating out the main meristem, and then the palm dies. So we have to stay on top of the one kind of quick. And the one thing I kind of say when looking for this one is, if you notice any sort of decline in the palm, it prefers the Canary Island date palms. We have yet to document it in any other types of palms, but we have been told that it may have the ability to go to other palms. Right now we have so many Canary Island date palms, it has plenty to choose from, so hopefully it'll stay just on that one species. So this one in particular tends to feed, like I said, in the meristem. So if it happens to feed on fronds when they're young and then the fronds grow out and expand, we can see the notches that were created by the weevil feeding on those immature fronds. And that is our biggest telltale sign for this particular pest. that being said, if you see an infestation of this level, I would be very concerned you may be losing the palm. I would definitely have people paying attention to this and looking for that first notch, that first thing that you think might look like a notch. That's when you really want to be getting this. Imidacloprid does work to treat this pest. Right now, as a preventative, they're doing a lot of soil drenches of imidacloprid to treat it. We tend to recommend, if you already have evidence of the pest inside the palm, to go for injection. It moves quicker and more straight up to the meristem, so therefore we're getting a faster dose up there to treat the pest. We are still working on research on our triage product, the amlodipine benzoate, against this pest. So hopefully we'll have that information soon. It's been kind of a trick trying to find people who will let you do research, because you always need control palms, and that means the palm has to possibly die. Nobody wants to lose a $30,000 palm, so always a bit of a challenge, but we're working on this one. That being said, with this one in particular, we're not quarantining in any way, shape, or form, so if palms are moving, make sure you inspect them prior to them being shipped to you. And when you get them and they're laying on the ground like this, inspect that meristem again. Make sure there's nothing in there. Because that's going to be how this pest is going to move fast and furiously, is it's going to get into a nursery stock and it's going to be shipped out. So nurseries are trying to be preventative and doing their imidacloprid applications, but unfortunately it's going to be one of those scenarios where someone's going to get missed, and next thing you know, we're going to ship it out someplace and it's going to be throughout California. So they have shown that this weevil is, or does have the ability to survive throughout California. So we do have the potential of having it move throughout the entire state. So keep that in mind with this one in particular. Treatments will work. We just have to do quick identification to get to it before it destroys the meristem and kills it. So if you have any questions on this one, please type them in and we'll get to them at the end. The next pest that we tend to see is the palm leaf skeletonizer. I don't know how many guys have seen this one out here. I've seen a ton of this out in the Las Vegas area. Seen a couple instances in the Bay Area, but essentially people notice the feeding, the kind of feeding stippling, and then you notice these little tiny worms on the fronds. That's the indicator you got this palm leaf skeletonizer going on. And I must say, anytime you're working with palms and you happen to find a pest that you don't recognize right off, take a photo, please. And if you can, capture the pest, preserve the pest, because we have to watch very carefully any new pests that are coming into our palms, and make sure we get them identified and see what level offender they might be. So I've had a couple instances where people have had fan palms die of a pink rot situation, and then they find larvae up in the kind of necrotic tissue. By all means, please save those. Dr. Hodel, he'll work with us. He'll help identify and see what's going on. But this was one of those instances where people just saw an overall decline, a yellowing of the Canary Island date palm. As you can see in that bottom left photo, when they kind of did a closer inspection, that's when they saw the damage. And this is one of those pests that's very easily controlled with Imajet. So you just have to get up close, take a look, and identify. And note that some people have told me they feel it looks like black diamond scale. But keep in mind, right now, we really only see black diamond scale on our fan palms. So you should not be seeing that on your canaries. So keep that in mind. If it's something you think looks similar, it might actually be this guy here. The other one, this one's pretty much on our cycads. It's the Mealy Bugs. We get a lot of Mealy Bugs on these guys, and we have them planted on our landscapes, usually in mass. We don't usually have one by itself. So keep in mind, once you tend to get one infested, they all tend to infest. Cycads are a little bit sensitive to chemicals, so kind of keep that in mind. That's why we tend to prefer using the azosol, the organic azadiractant product, as like kind of a soil drench for this one. And it does a great job of knocking back these mealy bugs, and so it'll clean them up. The other one that looks similar that we've gotten calls on that are kind of mixed up is when we get scale on them, because it gives that same wide effect, so people tend to think it's mealy bugs, but it's actually a scale. And unfortunately, when these guys infest, you can see in the upper left photo, they do it in mass, and they just completely kill and brown out very quickly. So treatment is definitely recommended. Azosol, Imajet, both of them will work. Problem is it's usually very hard to inject these. So usually we start with Azosol. If it's an older, mature one, we might be able to do the injection of Imajet, but kind of keep that in mind. Okay, the invasive shottle borer, you guys already know about this pest. The thing about this one is it will go into palm trees. So we've already documented it going into palm trees. And the problem with this pest is the fact that the beetle bores in, it doesn't really consume the plant material. It just goes in and lays its fungal infection that it brings with it, which happens to be Fusarium, and then it feeds on that Fusarium. So we've had some issues with this particular pest in palms in the fact that when they tend to bore in, because the pseudobark is moist but not necessarily feedable, but it can grow the Fusarium there, we've observed that it's not necessarily going into the vascular bundles, and that is where our chemical travels. So it can be difficult to actually treat this pest with trunk injection. You may want to try a spray as well with this one. The disease that it brings along with it, we can help protect the vascular bundle with the propofol. However, you'll still get a lot of degradation in the pseudobark from the beetle itself. So this one is more of a challenge for us to be treating with trunk injection. So if you have questions on this one, let me know. And we're always looking for research. So if you happen to have a few, let us know. Wouldn't mind doing a little research on this one. So I'm going to get into the diseases now that tend to get into palms, and I'll kind of give you a lowdown on the chemicals we use in advance because the way they work is kind of significant. Phosphajet is one of the chemicals we use as a fungicide, and this one stimulates the plant material to protect itself. So it's not actually a fungistat going in and attacking the actual fungus itself, whereas propofol is a fungicide that's actually going after the fungus. It's not stimulating the plant material to protect itself. So we use these two chemicals in very different ways usually. So I'll kind of go over that as I'm kind of going through the different diseases that we work with in palms. And the number one call I get on diseases in palms, aside from Fusarium, is actually pink rot. Pink rot is prevalent in our area throughout California, and it's partly to do with our moisture levels and our palms. There is no cure for pink rot. The best thing you can do is sanitary measures, removing the infected fronds, trying to get the moisture out of the palm area. So for instance, if a palm is planted in turf, try and pull the turf back. Try and get irrigation heads that have a larger droplet size, so it's less likely to mist and float in the air. But with pink rot, it's one of those scenarios where when it gets into the fronds, you can lose and basically rot out the entire meristem. However, if you get pink rot in the main trunk of the palm, it can actually cause failure. So you're probably better off getting the fronds if you did than in the trunk. But we found that doing applications of Phosphajet improves the health of the palm and can help fight against the pink rot. So anytime we've come into a situation where we've had pink rot, we recommended pruning out the infected wood as best we can, adjusting the irrigation, and doing an injection of Phosphajet. And we've been able to get some to recover very nicely and continue to flourish. Anytime we are fighting any sort of disease in palms or pests, you always have to make sure you're trying to treat whatever is affecting them first before you give them nutrients. However, we're almost always pushing nutrients after we're treating some sort of infection or pest in a palm. And the reason being is because of their reduced canopy and their need for nutrients. When we start having to prune and clean things out, we know we're stressing them. So a lot of times we'll do an application of whatever the treatment is, and then we're going to follow it up with a nutrient application later that season or 6 months later into the fall. And I say that specifically because whenever we're working with palms, we try and do all of our applications in cool temperatures. Due to their reduced canopy up top, they are at risk for getting things like chemical burns, scorch, things of that nature. So we want to make sure we're doing our applications in low temperatures and trying to make sure we get it in usually in early spring or in fall after the peak temperature heat has broken. This is a fun one. This actually happened in San Jose, California. This is called sudden crown drop. I think the name is fairly self-evident. And it just so happened that we had these great before and after photos. The before photo was taken because like, wow, my palm tree is kind of leaning. Should I be concerned? And literally about 24 hours later, they had right to be concerned because it did. It dropped. And those crowns are incredibly heavy. In this case, luckily enough, there was no damage. Nobody was injured. However, you can see how the palm really overall didn't look terribly unhealthy. However, this particular fungal infection tends to cause this to happen rather quickly. And so far, we've only observed it in the Canarian date palms. And at this point, we don't know of any treatments. It's just kind of a heads up about this one. Be aware of it, kind of be looking for it. We talk about leaning palms. In this case, it was actually leaning right at what we call the pineapple, which was an indicator that maybe something might be going on with it. So this is a rare instance, but it does happen. So kind of pay attention for this one. The other one that's kind of rare for us in California is the Ganoderma Butt Rot, but we do get it, especially when we like to plant our palms in turf areas. That does sometimes tend to perpetuate the problem. It can also be perpetuated if we like to put mulch around them quite a bit. So now we have them in the turf area and we're putting mulch around them and holding a lot of moisture around them. So again, this one does not have a treatment. It tends to be fatal, but be aware of it. By putting them more in a sandy soil away from turf, we can usually avoid this from being an infection. But you can see from that cross-section how badly that disease went in and just deteriorated that vascular bundle or the vascular bundles in there. So it's a very significant and fairly quick death for this one. And people have mistaken it for Fusarium. So you can kind of see you get the dead and dying fronds, and it dies pretty quick. So we've had a few instances. That's why I bring this one up. So look around the base. You'll usually see the conchs there, and that'll help you identify what you're actually dealing with. And then, of course, when it comes to removal, make sure you do everything you can not to spread it to the other palms in the area. And when disposing of them, make sure you dispose of it in a location that is not going to spread to other palms or other trees. So again, no treatment for this one either. Black diamond scale, now this one we can treat. So black diamond scale, unfortunately with its name, it makes people want to treat it with imidacloprid. It is not actually a scale, just so happens to look like a scale, so they named it black diamond scale, but it's actually a fungal infection. This fungal infection pretty much only infests the California fan palm. However, we have now learned that most of our Mexican fan palms and California fan palms have hybridized. So even though it may look like a Mexican fan palm, it has some California fan palm DNA in it, and therefore it makes it susceptible to black diamond scale. So at first we were saying, oh, Mexican fan palms don't get this, and then all of a sudden it started looking like they did, and we realized it went down to kind of like a DNA level. So keep that in mind. A true Mexican fan palm cannot get this, but any sort of hybrid or a straight up California fan palm can get it. And again, it's one of those things, it does look like scale, but it's actually fairly treatable. Problem is people tend not to necessarily notice it or realize what's going on, or they're treating with an insecticide trying to kill it. And if it is left to its own devices, it can eventually kill a palm tree. So keep that in mind. It is something you definitely want to treat for. And we found that treatments for this, usually fall is best if you can. If not, go for it in spring. But doing an injection of phosphorus, the new fronds will come out clean and healthy, and they do not seem to infest from the old fronds. And here's the trick. Remember, we don't want to over prune. So the initial reaction would be go in and remove all the fronds that have the infestation, but it's not necessary. yes, remove the old fronds that have dropped below the 45, but any that happen to still be viable in providing nutrients for the new fronds, by all means, keep those. Remove them when they're finally not of use, but we do not see them reinfesting the new fronds. So usually it tends to be a one and done application. This is not something that has to be done year after year. However, if the infestation comes back, it may be needed to do it again. All right, black diamond scale. Now, this is one I'm sure everybody wants to get to because this is the most expensive issue we have in our palms at this point in time. So it's the Fusarium wilt of palms. The way you kind of identify Fusarium away from any other disease or issue with palms is the fact that the disease tends to kill down one side of a frond around the tip and then back the other side. And it doesn't just hit our P.canariensis palms. It'll also go into our fan palms, and it does that same unique dieback where it starts on one side and dies around the frond itself. So it's a very distinct way of identifying Fusarium in the palms. And so we have learned that there's different levels of infection. Some tend to kill a palm rather quickly. Some infections do not kill a palm nearly as quickly. So either way, we've kind of come up with a bit of a protocol out here in California that's worked very well for us. And it's actually a dual treatment of both fungicides. So in this case, usually if it's a preventative, you want to start with the Palms-Arborjet. If you already have the Fusarium, you start with the propofol, and then you tend to alternate those every other year for application. And we've been able to maintain palms that are infected and keep them growing and healthy. There's a few examples out there I can send you if you'd like to know how to do it. Oops, but the one thing I want to say is when you're alternating these fungicides, you have to add in the nutrients, because essentially what you're doing is you're suppressing the disease, and then you are pushing new growth with the nutrients. So that way the palm is trying to continually outgrow the disease as well. So always start first with the fungicide, then put in the nutrient, and then alternate the fungicides on off years. And we've been able to maintain them nicely with this protocol. So that kind of leads me into talking about palms and nutrients. Palms that have their full breadth of nutrients tend to be able to fortify themselves better against disease and pest infections. So that being said, Palm-Jet is the one we use as an injectable. It's got macronutrients as well as micronutrients, and it's the key micronutrients that we're really looking at for the health of our palms. Most of our palms are suffering in some way, shape, or form from nutrient deficiency. But again, the one thing I want to stress is to make sure when we're doing these applications, we're doing it in cool spring or fall temperatures, usually when it's below 80 degrees. That way we don't risk any sort of burning in the fronds. So this was one example where it was used for frizzle top. It was very nicely done. Frizzle top is, if you see it, you know what I'm talking about. It's where you kind of see that death and dieback, a lot of dead fronds at the top, usually a bit of a leaning to it. Going ahead and giving the nutrient what it needs will straighten it straight out of that. Frizzle top is always a nutrient issue. Most of our palm things we see are the issue. And so we're constantly trying to improve the health of our palms. And most of the time we are doing soil applications of nutrients. Well, keep in mind, if we're truly growing them in the nice sandy soil like they tend to prefer, it's a hard time holding those nutrients in the soil for the palm to take them up. That's why when we trunk inject them, they're so much more effective. You can get a palm to recover so much more quickly when you actually inject the nutrient into it. But by all means, keep trying to work on the soil and providing the nutrient they need to the soil. But when it comes to like a very severe deficiency, like in this case it was manganese, this is something where soil applications are not going to be enough to recover this palm. But a trunk injection, getting that full dose in there can start to bring it back. So the one thing that I prefer and love about palms is the fact that they are basically just like a book when it comes to nutrient deficiencies and their fronds. They all present in their own way, very distinctly. So like for instance, nitrogen, you get that overall kind of yellowing. Iron deficiency, you get that kind of flecking of green. Manganese, you can see how it starts green in the center and yellows at the ends. The only one that we have an issue with, the boron deficiency, looks very similar to boron toxicity. So that one may require a soil test to get a really good answer for that one. But so far, the only place where I've really seen in California where we have a lot of boron toxicity issues tend to be in the central California, out towards kind of Paso Robles, kind of Santa Maria, through there. We have a couple strains of high boron concentrations where I've actually seen boron toxicity taking place. And I've heard up by Stockton we have a vein as well, but I have not actually seen that one. So just be aware of it. But otherwise, looking at the fronds can do a world of good of telling you what's actually going on with your palm. And the one thing I always talk about is if you have a leaning palm, you have a nutrient deficiency. And when I say leaning palm, I don't mean that beautiful, wonderful vacation photo we'd all like to be on right now. You can see that's a very straight palm that's failing at the bottom and leaning. When I talk about a leaning palm, I mean when you look at the crown, the top of the palm, the new growth, you see it lean. And when it's leaning like that, it is almost always, 99% of the time, a nutrient deficiency. And you can actually give them the nutrients and they will start growing straight again. Sometimes, I was actually just in Vegas where there's this perfect example. You could see in this line of palms that they all had a nutrient deficiency right around the same time, and there's kind of like a bend or kink in them, and then they straightened all up. It was very distinctive. There's also a location in I think it's Danville, that's got beautiful palm-lined kind of courtyard area, and they're all leaning at the top. They all are just crying out for a nutrient. So by all means, on those, when you start to see leaning, this is the time that you want to actually do the injection. You want to get that immediate full dose in there to get that recovery going as quick as possible. And then you can start working on the soil applications to work on maintaining the health of the palms. So there is one thing I want to talk about, because when we're dealing with palm trees, we are trying to hold the fertilizers and the nutrients in the root zone of the palm. Nutrient is one of those great products that I know, I'm constantly talking about it. And it's just because it's got humates and humectants in there that really help hold the water in the root zone, so it makes the nutrients more available. And the reason why I like this one is because it's got the micronutrients packed with it as well. It's got the kelps and cytokinins in it, so that really helps improve root growth as well. So if you're going to take the time to do the watering and do the fertilizing, you really want to add a product like this in there to help make those work to their full benefit. So that's kind of my quick plug for Nutrient, as I always do. But keep in mind, we got to water. Even when we're dealing with any sort of application, whether it's Nutrient, insecticide, fungicide, you know, we have to make sure that the palm has water, but we got to make sure we're not drowning it, which tends to happen to our palms here in California quite often just by the location in which we put them. So I hope that helps you guys and kind of give you a little more insight and information into the palms in California. There is probably another hour's worth I could talk about palms, but I've been told my webinars are too long as it is. So send me any questions you might have. I'm more than happy to answer. And really, since we're all kind of trapped inside at this point in time, as you guys are finding issues or having questions about things you're seeing out in the field, please don't hesitate to send me a text or an email, send me photos. I'm more than happy to help you identify what might be going on. And all I ever ask is get me the full tree or palm photo and then a close-up of the issue that you're observing. And I will do my best to get you the answers that you're looking for. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time, and I'll pass it over to Zach now to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm going to stop the recording